In a mansion built on wealth but haunted by silence, a cold billionaire pretends to sleep, only to discover the hidden kindness of his new maid. What he finds that night will melt his heart, change his life, and teach society a lesson about love beyond class and status. This is a heartwarming tale of trust, compassion, and a romance no one expected. Jeck Williams had everything a man could dream of. Luxury cars in his garage, glittering chandeliers in every corner of his mansion, and a fortune that made people whisper his name with awe and envy. Yet none of it mattered. His nights were haunted by silence, and his days were filled with suspicion. People only came close to him for his money. Smiles were fake, promises were hollow. He had learned long ago that kindness was just another mask people wore when they wanted something from him. At 35, he was powerful, handsome, and feared, but deep inside, he carried a loneliness that no amount of wealth could cure. When his loyal staff retired after years of service, Jeck was forced to hire new help. That's when she walked into his life. Sarah. Sarah was only 25, yet there was a strength in her quiet presence. Her brown hair framed her soft face, and her smile was the kind that could calm storms. But what struck Jeck most was not her beauty. It was her simplicity. She didn't try to flatter him. She didn't pretend to be someone else. She simply did her work with care, moving around his massive home as if it were a place she respected, not a treasure chest to be looted. Jeck found himself watching her when she wasn't looking. The way she arranged fresh flowers in the hallway. The way her fingers brushed the dust off his books as if each one carried meaning. The way she hummed softly, filling the cold halls with a warmth he hadn't felt in years. But his heart was cautious. His trust was buried deep under scars of betrayal. He told himself again and again, no one is selfless, not even her. And yet, a quiet voice inside whispered, what if she's different? The war inside him grew, until one evening he decided he needed proof. He needed to know who Sarah truly was when no one was watching, and so he devised a plan. Jeck would pretend to fall asleep in the lounge chair, where she usually came to tidy the room at night. If she was like everyone else, she would reveal her true colors when she thought he wasn't aware. Would she steal? Would she mock him under her breath? Would she finally prove that kindness was nothing but a mask? As he leaned back on the leather chair that night, closing his eyes and slowing his breath, his heart pounded louder than ever. The silence of the mansion felt alive, every tick of the clock echoing like a drum in his chest. In that moment, Jeck wasn't the billionaire everyone admired. He was a lonely man, desperate to know if there was still such a thing as real kindness in a world that had betrayed him too many times. He told himself it was only a test, a simple game to confirm what he already believed. But deep inside, he feared the truth, because if Sarah turned out to be like the rest, he knew. His heart would close forever. And as the sound of her footsteps approached down the marble hallway, Jeck drew a long breath, his eyes shut tight, his body still. The test had begun. The mansion was wrapped in silence that evening, the kind of silence that felt like it had its own heartbeat. Sarah walked slowly into the lounge, her footsteps so light they barely touched the marble floor. In her hands, she carried a small tray with tea, a glass of water, and a folded cloth. Simple things, but prepared with care. Her eyes fell on Jeck. He was lying back in the grand leather chair, his face calm, his breathing steady, his eyes closed. To her, it seemed he had fallen asleep after another long day of endless work. She froze for a moment, studying him. It wasn't the cold, powerful billionaire she saw. It was a man with weary lines on his face, a man who looked as though he carried the weight of the world alone. Her lips pressed together tightly, as though holding back words she dared not say. For a long time, she simply stood there, tray in her trembling hands, her heart beating fast in the silence. Sarah wasn't like the others who had worked in that house. She didn't see Jeck as a man made of money. She saw something deeper, a loneliness so sharp it cut through his perfect walls. She quietly placed the tray down and walked closer. The blanket had slipped slightly from his shoulder. With the gentleness of a sister, of a friend, of someone who cared far too much, she pulled it back up, adjusting it to keep him warm. Her fingers hovered near his hand, hesitating. Then, with courage she barely understood, she touched his hand lightly. It was a fleeting touch, as if she feared he would wake and push her away. And then, her voice broke the silence. A whisper, fragile but full of truth. "Why do you look so lonely, sir?" she breathed, her words trembling in the air. "You have everything, the world at your feet, but your heart looks so empty." She blinked quickly, fighting back tears she didn't want anyone to see. Her voice grew even softer, almost a prayer. "I wish someone would care for you the way you deserve, not for your wealth, not for your name, but for you." The words stabbed Jeck's chest like lightning. Behind his closed eyes he froze, his heart slamming against his ribs. No one had ever said such a thing to him. No one had ever dared to see beyond the billionaire title. Sarah didn't know she had been heard. She thought her secret was safe, tucked away in the silence of the room. She reached into her pocket and pulled out something small, a worn-out teddy bear, its fur faded with age. It was her only childhood keepsake, her one piece of comfort in a hard world. She placed it gently beside him on the couch, as if offering him her most private treasure. A silent gift, a symbol of care. Then, without another word, she began cleaning the room. Her hands moved gracefully, her body swaying slightly as she hummed a soft tune. The sound filled the cold walls with warmth, chasing away the emptiness. Jeck's chest tightened. Each word she had whispered echoed louder than the ticking clock. No one, not his business partners, not his so-called friends, had ever spoken to the lonely man inside him. For the first time in years, he felt seen. And as Sarah moved quietly around the room, unaware of the storm she had set off inside him, Jeck lay frozen, pretending to sleep, but knowing his life would never be the same again. Jeck lay in his massive king-sized bed that night, the silk sheets cool against his skin, yet his body burned with restless energy. The house was quiet. The only sound the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. But inside his mind it was anything but silent. Her words, her soft, trembling voice. "Why do you look so lonely, sir? You have everything, but your heart looks so empty." He turned over, pressing his face into the pillow as though he could smother the echo of her voice. But it was no use. Her words had carved themselves into his soul. He had set a trap, certain he would expose her as just another greedy servant. Instead, she revealed a secret he never expected. Kindness, pure and selfless. The image of the teddy bear beside him replayed in his mind. That tiny, worn-out thing she cherished, she had given to him without hesitation. No one had ever given him something so personal, so genuine, and it terrified him. Because for the first time in years, Jeck felt something breaking inside his carefully built walls. He tossed and turned, pulling the blanket, then throwing it aside. Sleep refused to come. Her face, her eyes filled with unspoken pain, haunted him in the dark. When dawn broke, he rose earlier than usual, his mind foggy from a sleepless night. But there was something different in him now, an eagerness he couldn't explain. He wanted to see her again. He wanted to hear her voice. That morning he watched Sarah closely. She moved quietly through the kitchen, her apron tied neatly, her hair pulled back in a simple bun. She hummed softly, a tune so delicate it made the cold walls of the mansion seem warmer. Jeck's eyes narrowed, not with suspicion anymore, but with a strange, unshakable curiosity. He noticed details he had never paid attention to before. Her hands, thin but strong, with small calluses from years of work. Her eyes, calm but carrying secrets she never spoke aloud. Her posture, humble yet dignified, as if no hardship could crush her spirit. She never complained, not when she carried heavy laundry baskets, not when she scrubbed the marble floors until they gleamed, not even when her arms trembled under the weight of her chores. Instead, she smiled softly as she placed fresh flowers in a vase, arranging them with care as though they were priceless. She even whispered to them as though flowers deserved kindness too. Jeck found himself lingering in doorways, pretending to read a document, when in reality he was just waiting for the sound of her footsteps. The rhythm of her walk, the gentle swish of her skirt, brought a strange comfort to him. The mansion, once a hollow palace echoing with silence, began to feel alive. Every corner seemed warmer when she passed through it. Every room she touched carried her quiet strength. And for the first time in years, Jeck's cold mask began to crack. The man who trusted no one, the man who lived only in shadows of suspicion, found himself drawn to the light of a maid's quiet heart. He tried to remind himself she was just a servant. But no reminder could silence the truth. Sarah was changing everything, and Jeck knew, deep in his sleepless heart, that he was no longer just testing her. He was falling into something far more dangerous. The city lights twinkled faintly outside the mansion windows, but inside the air was still and heavy with silence. It was far past midnight when Jeck finally returned from his meeting, his steps slow, his body aching with exhaustion. The grand house stood tall and cold, but one faint sound lingered in the halls, the swish of a mop against marble. Curiosity pulled him toward the lounge. And there she was, Sarah. Her slender figure moved gracefully, her hair tied back, her face glowing with quiet determination even at this late hour. Most people would have been asleep, but she was still working, her hands red from scrubbing, her back bent with effort. Jeck's chest tightened. Something about her silent devotion unsettled him. Why did she give so much to a man who had given her nothing in return? He sank into the leather couch, leaning back with deliberate slowness. He let his eyes close, his breaths fall into rhythm, pretending once again to be asleep. A part of him longed, almost desperately, to know what she would do this time. Minutes passed. Sarah finished her mopping and set the bucket aside. When she turned, her gaze fell upon him. Her lips parted slightly in surprise, her master asleep in the lounge at such an hour. But then her eyes sharpened. She noticed something Jeck had not expected, his hand, trembling faintly against the armrest. Her face shifted with concern. She hurried to his side, kneeling gracefully beside the couch. Her hand, warm and trembling, pressed gently against his forehead. Her soft gasp filled the quiet room. "You're burning up," she whispered, panic laced in her voice. Jeck nearly opened his eyes right then. He was shocked. No one had touched him with such genuine care in years. Not business partners, not friends, not even his family. But Sarah didn't hesitate. She rushed from the lounge, her footsteps echoing through the empty halls. Moments later, the clatter of pots and the faint scent of broth drifted from the kitchen. Jeck's heart pounded. Was she really cooking for him? Soon, she returned with a small bowl of steaming soup, her hand steady despite her haste. She set it down on the table and carefully lifted his head with surprising gentleness. "Even the strongest man needs someone to care for him," she whispered, her voice a blend of sadness and determination. She spooned the soup carefully, bringing it to his lips as though he were fragile glass. Her eyes lingered on his face, not with greed or fear, but with a tenderness that shook him to his core. Inside, Jeck froze. Each spoonful she offered pierced deeper into his heart than any weapon could. He wanted to open his eyes, to tell her he wasn't asleep, to thank her. But something held him back. Perhaps it was fear. Perhaps it was the overwhelming realization that he was beginning to feel something far too dangerous. Because in that moment, Jeck understood. Sarah wasn't just a maid. She was the only person who had ever looked past his fortune and seen the lonely man inside. And as she sat there, feeding him quietly, whispering gentle words meant only for the silence, Jeck knew his life was no longer under his control. Something powerful was pulling him closer to her, something stronger than wealth, stronger than fear. It was love, raw and uninvited, stealing into his guarded heart. Days later, Jeck could no longer hold back. One evening, he asked Sarah to sit across from him at the dining table. She hesitated, nervous. Maids never sat with billionaires. But his voice was firm. "Sarah," he said, his tone softer than she had ever heard, "I pretended to sleep, to test you." Her face turned pale. She thought she had done something wrong, but Jeck leaned forward, his eyes burning with truth. "What I saw changed me. You cared for me when you thought I couldn't see. You spoke about my loneliness, and you were right." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. "I never meant for you to hear. I only wished you wouldn't feel so alone." At that moment, Jeck reached for her hand across the table. "From tonight, I don't want to be alone anymore. I don't want you to just work in this house. I want you to share it with me." Weeks turned into months, and the mansion that once felt like a cold, lonely castle transformed into a home full of warmth. The walls that had only echoed silence now carried laughter, soft conversations, and the sound of footsteps that no longer walked alone. Every morning, Jeck would wake to the smell of fresh bread and Sarah humming in the kitchen. He often stood at the door, just watching her, amazed at how a woman so simple could bring so much life into a place worth millions yet previously empty. Her smile, her kindness, her small touches of care. Those were treasures no money could ever buy. Jeck, once known as the man with eyes colder than ice, now carried a different look in them. His sharp gaze softened whenever Sarah was near. The staff noticed it. The neighbors whispered about it. But for the first time, Jeck didn't care about the world's judgment. He cared only about the woman who had shown him that his heart still had the power to love. Sarah, too, found her world changing. She no longer felt like a maid in someone's house. Jeck treated her with dignity, respect, and devotion. He walked beside her, not ahead of her. When she laughed, he laughed. When she worried, he reassured her. And at night, when the world outside was dark and silent, they would sit together by the fire, sharing stories, dreams, and the quiet comfort of being together. But one thing remained: the teddy bear. That little childhood toy Sarah had once placed beside him on the couch. Jeck kept it in his bedroom, on the nightstand, like a sacred symbol. Sometimes he would hold it in his hand and whisper, "This was the night my life changed. The night I realized kindness was greater than gold." For Jeck, the biggest lesson was clear. Kindness is never weakness. He had spent years thinking people only wanted his money, his power, his name. But Sarah showed him that true wealth was in love freely given, without expecting anything in return. Their love story spread quietly, not through newspapers, not through headlines, but through people who witnessed them together. They became a living reminder that society often divides people by class, wealth, and status. But love breaks those walls. For the young men who once believed success was measured in money, Jeck's story reminded them, a heart cared for is worth more than a fortune unshared. For women who feared their simplicity was never enough, Sarah's life spoke loudly. Gentleness can melt even the coldest hearts. And for a society that too often judged worth by status, their union was proof that happiness doesn't come from gold. It comes from love, respect, and compassion. As time passed, Jeck and Sarah walked hand in hand, not as a billionaire and a maid, but as two souls who had found each other in the unlikeliest way. And every night, before Jeck closed his eyes, he would glance at the teddy bear and smile, because it wasn't just a toy. It was the reminder that even the smallest act of love could awaken a heart that had forgotten how to beat.